It was so much easier to lose weight before. I don't know, I feel like this time it is harder and it's taking longer. Or if only I had enough willpower to lose weight again. Or I feel like my body's fighting me. I just cannot lose weight anymore. So those are the most common things I hear from my patients when they come in to establish with me as their obesity medicine specialist. And I have to explain to them that yes, it was easier to lose weight before, and there's a reason, a physiologic reason why it is so much harder to lose weight now. B, weight loss and obesity treatment has nothing to do with willpower. And I will explain over the next couple sessions, over the next couple episodes, why that is. And C, your body is fighting you. You're absolutely right. So let me tell you about the story of The Biggest Loser. So in 2004, the reality TV show, The Biggest Loser, tried to show the world that if people with obesity diet really hard and exercise really hard, they will lose weight. And they made this into a contest. And yes, contestants lost the weight, but spoiler alert, as we all know, they gained it back. And they gained it back even more. Does that sound familiar? So, you see, the premise of the show was based on this old prescription that we still use today, that we still think about today, that dates all the way back to as far as 400 BC, and is attributed to no other than the father of obesity, of not obesity, but the father of medicine, Hippocrates, who stated that if we eat less and exercise more, we are going to lose weight and we have cured obesity. And believe it or not, we still think this way today. So it's quite interesting when you go to your doctor's office, a doctor who does not specialize in obesity medicine, that you are still being told that if you eat less and exercise more, you have cured obesity and you should just try and lose weight. As if, like many of you, like many of us, you have not tried to lose weight many times before. So it's funny because we still, we don't think that the kittens cause the plague anymore, but somehow we still have this notion that, obesity can be cured by eating less and exercising more. And even though we know very well right now, we have studied it, and we know that obesity is a hormonal disease. And so, but yes, we still like to tell patients you need to eat less and exercise more. But the interesting thing is even doctors who come in to see me and establish with me as their obesity medicine specialist still think that they just don't exercise enough, that they just don't, they eat too many calories, and they don't have enough willpower. So they still think that about themselves. So we need to work on changing this pervasive thought that it is a patient's fault for their obesity and it can be just easily cured if only they ate less and exercise more. So let me go back to the Biggest Loser contest. So why is what happened in the Biggest Loser, and why is it so important to you, and why you should never again think if I only had enough willpower? So in 2016, after noticing that the contestants were gaining the weight back, even after working so hard to lose the weight through a lot of exercise and calorie restriction, the National Institute of Health decided to study the 16 of the contestants from season 8, and this was in 2009. So, and they published their findings in two papers in subsequent years. So, remember that the contestants uh, gain their weight back. So, here's where it gets really interesting. So, the NIH monitored the 16 contestants from season 8. Their average weight was 330 pounds, and their average resting metabolic rate was about 2,700 calories. So I'm going to stop now and explain a very important concept to you, and that is the concept of the resting metabolic rate, because it is one of the things that we follow when we talk about obesity medicine and as obesity medicine specialists. So, Some of you may know this concept, some of you may not. So I'm sure you have all asked yourself, just how many calories do I burn in a day? And the calories you burn in a day are dependent on four factors. The first one is this resting metabolic rate. This is incredibly important because this is the amount of calories you burn at rest. So you burn when you do nothing. So a hospitalized patient who is laying in bed and who's not eating, who's not drinking, who's not getting out of bed to go to the bathroom is only going to burn their basal metabolic. They're only going to use their basal metabolic rate. And those are the calories that are necessary to maintain your respiration, to maintain your heartbeat, to maintain your temperature. The next one that is encompassed in the total energy expenditure is very interesting. It's actually the thermic effect of food. Because did you know that when you eat, you actually need energy to absorb and consume the food you ate? So, this is the interesting part. The the carbohydrates use about 10% of the carbohydrates you ingested, about 10% it's used to digest that food. For protein, it's even more. About 30% of the calories you ingested are used to digest and absorb the protein. So, one of the many reasons why we say protein, protein, protein when we talk about obesity medicine. Also, another reason why we say protein, protein, protein when we talk about obesity medicine is because remember when I was talking about your basal metabolic rate? Well, guess what? Your basal metabolic rate fully depends on nothing but the fat free mass. And that is very much your muscle mass is part of that fat free mass. So remember that because this is a very important concept. Your basal metabolic rate is very dependent on your fat free mass. So, another reason why we say protein, protein, protein is because when we lose weight, we want to make sure we maintain that muscle. So, that is the thermic effect of foods. Oh, and fats use none. So, fats use almost no calorie for absorption and digestion. So the other one is your exercise. So the third component of the total energy expenditure is going to be your exercise. And that depends from one person to another. That depends from one day to another for the same person. One day you may be running 3 miles or maybe lifting weights, and the next day you may be doing nothing. And lastly is this thing that is very neat. So that is the non exercise activity thermogenesis. It is neat because this is your day-to-day activity. So walking to work, gardening, washing dishes, fidgeting, that all encompasses the NEAT or the non-exercise activity thermogenesis. But the concept that is most important to remember right now, for now, is that your basal metabolic rate is dependent on your fat-free mass, and it's one of the reasons why we say make sure to maintain that muscle mass when you are in the process of active weight loss or maintenance for that matter. So, um, now, our total energy expenditure, of course, is affected by other things as well, your temperature, your inflammation, other hormones. So it's not really an exact number. So now that you have an idea of the total energy expenditure and the resting metabolic rate, let's go back to our stories about the biggest loser and see what happened to their basal metabolic rate. So, people with a higher body mass are going to have a higher basal metabolic rate. And when they do lose weight, that basal metabolic rate decreases, and that's expected. Also, when people lose weight, their lean body mass, their muscle mass decreases. And so, for most people, when they lose weight, for example, if they lose 4 pounds of weight, 3 pounds of that would be fat or adipose tissue, and 1 pound of that will be muscle. And remember, the muscle and the fat free mass is what determines your basal metabolic rate. So, when the contestants in The Biggest Loser worked out really hard to not lose muscle mass. They worked out quite a bit at maintaining that muscle mass. Because, as the author of the study said, adding exercise, particularly resistance training, one of the other things that we talked about in obesity medicine all the time, resistance training, resistance trainings, resistance trainings, muscle mass, muscle mass, muscle mass, protein, 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 right? So the author of the study said adding exercise, particularly resistance training, is thought to preserve the fat free mass or the muscle mass, and thus it will attenuate that drop in the resting metabolic rate. So the contestants underwent 30 weeks of diet restriction, very important, so calorie and diet restriction, which was greater than 70% of their baseline energy requirements. They exercised so much, however, that they actually were able to maintain or lose very little of their fat free mass. So, looking at the studies, their basal weight was about 330 pounds, and their basal metabolic rate, an average to start with, was about 2,700 calories. And they lost quite a bit of weight over those 30 weeks. They lost an average of about 128 pounds, which was about 38% of the original body weight over the course of 30 weeks. So they lost quite a bit of weight, right? But because they didn't lose a lot of the fat-free mass, using this equation that's available on the internet called the Mifflin St. George, which if you are someone who has lost and gained and gained and lost weight, I don't recommend using. But anyway, for these contestants, by using the Mifflin St. George equation, they predicted that their basal metabolic rate would be about 2,400 calories. However, and here comes the sad part, when they actually measured their basal metabolic rate via indirect calorimetry, they were only burning an average of 1890 calories, so 1,890 calories, so which was 503 calories lower than predicted. So it's probably something you kind of suspected. However, you did not know what to call it. And this is called metabolic adaptation. So, to describe it mathematically, metabolic adaptation is the predicted basal metabolic rate, the one you measure, minus the true resting metabolic rate. And to explain it in normal terms, for patients who have reduced a significant amount of weight, you can reduce that metabolism significantly greater than you would expect by body composition change. So, for patients who have reduced a significant amount of weight, you can reduce the resting metabolic rate significantly greater than you would expect by body composition change. Body composition change. So this is really hard, really sad when you think about it. So this is where it gets even trickier. So remember how you went to your obesity medicine specialist after you just don't know any longer what you need to do because you're just not losing weight, and it was easier. You've done it before. You think you know what to do, but right now you just can't lose it, and you don't know what to do. Well, so they looked at the biggest losers the study 6 years. They looked at the contestants 6 years after the initial study, and all but one contestant gained the way back. And as we all know, they probably gain even more. And you would expect that their resting metabolic rate would have increased to prior levels or close to prior levels because their weight increased to prior levels. But guess what? And this is where it gets frustrating again. Their resting metabolic rate only increased to 1,903 calories in average, which is about 500 calories lower than the predicted resting metabolic rate, despite the weight gain. So the conclusion of the first study was, and I quote, that despite relative preservation of fat free mass, exercise did not prevent dramatic slowing of resting metabolism out of proportion to the weight loss. So I will repeat this again. Despite relative preservation of fat free mass, exercise did not prevent dramatic slowing of resting metabolism out of proportion to weight loss. So you see, as they learned in the second study, this metabolic adaptation may persist during weight maintenance and predispose to weight regain unless high levels of physical activity or caloric restriction are maintained. However, as we will discuss in our next session, maintaining this calorie restriction is hard. It has nothing to do with willpower. It has nothing to do with Yes, it has nothing to do with your willpower. It has to do with hormones and neurotransmitters. Because there's one thing that we have learned is that your brain is wired to not lose weight. So your brain does not like losing weight and does not like to maintain that weight loss. So we will talk about this in our next episode. But here's the conclusion of our second study 6 years later. Metabolic adaptation persists over time and is likely a proportional but incomplete response to contemporaneous efforts to reduce body weight. You got it. So, the resting metabolic rate has never returned to prior levels, and every time you try to lose more weight, that resting metabolic rate will drop again. So, if you keep losing weight by restricting calories, you will need to restrict more and more every time you try to lose weight. To what end? So, again, your brain does not like it when you lose weight. Your brain was created to protect you from starvation and has been perfecting the system for hundreds of thousands of years. The brain controls it all. Your brain increases and decreases your appetite, increases or decreases your metabolic rate, and it does it all so that it is harder and harder to lose weight and easier to gain after you have lost it. And it couldn't care less about your willpower, and your brain will win because it is wonderfully wired to win at this game. So, this is one of the main reasons why obesity is a chronic, relapsing, but treatable disease, however, not curable. So, fortunately, for those of us living in this day and age, we're continuing to find solutions through behavior changes, nutrition, medications, physical activity to better treat this hormonal disease. And if you're concerned about an obesity as a disease, please do consult with an obesity medicine certified specialist who can help you through this process and who understands these concepts very well. So this is what brought me to the next point. Where we need to think about obesity as a hormonal disease. We need to think about obesity as a hormonal disease. And please stay tuned for the next episode where we will discuss the interplay between hormones and neurotransmitters that regulate obesity so that you will again understand why it gets harder and harder to lose weight and why it has nothing to do with your willpower and what we can do about it.